everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again. And I am excited to say that we are at it's the kind of the unofficial 10th day of the 12 days of Christmas, because remember, the 12th day is actually our wrap up party, which of course I'm looking forward to. And for all you people that have not been able to join us live because of this thing called work, then just don't forget it's Saturday. So hopefully, if you don't have to work on Saturday, even if you've been enjoying all of these sessions on YouTube, please try to make a point to join us live for Saturday's wrap-up party. Now, this is just a shout out to any of my local people. We will be having in-house guests, as well as, of course, all of you with me, and we'll be having lots of fun kind of recapping all of the conversations we had with all of our really cool guests for this year's second annual 12 Days of Christmas. Now, in addition to that, don't forget, guys, we will be also drawing the tickets for the basket that we are, in a sense, raffling off. And remember, that's really kind of culminating to a super cool keepsake of the 12 Days of Christmas. I think really just about everybody who was a guest has managed to give us just a little bit of something so that you have an opportunity to kind of remember your time with us for the 12 Days of Christmas. And it's becoming quite a coveted basket. Actually, Julia, who I think is on, we just received your bag in the mail today. I didn't even get a chance to look at it, but thank you so much for that. I know Paul and Cindy told me the soaps are going in the mail today. So while we might not have the complete basket in hand for Saturday, we, of course, will be still raffling it off. But remember, you don't need to be in it to win it for the basket, so have no fear. But I do want to remind you guys, because a certain somebody forgot that today was Thursday. So today is Thursday. That means tomorrow is Friday, and that means tomorrow midnight, the opportunity to get in for that basket is over. So keep that in mind, of course. At the same time, many of our guests have extended to you guys wonderful discounts and specials that will extend beyond mine. And that, of course, was intentional. So don't forget, if you've forgotten all of those, go back, check out the YouTubes, and I'll also do my best for the wrap-up party to kind of have a complete list of all of our guests and their discounts so I can continue to highlight that for you and hopefully send them some love and thank them, of course, for being part of this with us this year. Now, a couple of other housekeeping things. Remember, we never know how long these go. It's just kind of how the vibe works, but you have to make it till the end. And then Laura will be helping us to select one lucky winner that is going to get a $20 store credit to shop with us here at Life. So as we're sort of winding down the end of our program, whenever I kind of feel like that is, we'll see how many participants we still have with us. I'll ask Laura to pick a number, and then I will scroll down and see who that lucky winner is. So that one, you do have to be here in order to be able to possibly take advantage of that winnings. Outside of that, guys, you pretty much should know the deal by now. So I really want to just kind of kick right off into our program. One of the things I think I'm super excited about, it was kind of purposely and then sometimes not so intentional, is the varied people that we've curated for this year's conversations in all different aspects of the fiber industry. Last night with Julia Hillbrand was a perfect example of, again, just another aspect of the fiber industry, incorporating our love for wool and, of course, our love for fine things as well as all things handmade. And that does not go without saying for our guest this evening. So super excited to introduce to you guys Laura Bellows. Now, the funny thing is, which I'm sure she's going to also affirm, that probably most people call her JUL because it's such a cool name. Of course, a lot of us think of the singer JUL. That is the name behind her brand, but it is not, in fact, her name. Now, we're going to get into that. I know now where the name comes from, but that's probably about the only thing I really know about Laura. So one of the things I will say before I let her have an opportunity to introduce herself, and then true to form, guys, we're just going to kind of dive right into it. The best part of the fact that I don't know much about Laura is that's where I'm going to have an opportunity to ask the questions, the things that I know I'm curious about, and inevitably, I'm sure you guys will be as well. Now, the same way in which Julie and I got together. I finally had an opportunity to meet Laura in person when we were all together for Patty Lyon's retreat that she calls Infinity. So we were all in Jersey together in September. So much like Julie and I were talking last night, as vendors, after kind of the mad rush dies down, if you will, especially when you've got a static population of attendees at a conference like where we were at, it leaves time for us to kind of all like hang out and chit chat and vibe. And it ends up being such a great benefit in that way. Now, one of the things that I made no qualms about telling Laura was that for the longest time, I've always fangirled on her stuff. Her aesthetic is very much my aesthetic in terms of just that kind of combining the jewelry, the sterling silver, the metals, a little bit of heavy with a little bit of like delicacy and functionality. I mean, anybody who comes to my booth, you see it's all wood and all metal. And if you come to my house, that's pretty much the same thing as well. And I remember way back in the day when I started getting involved with this industry and I started vending. I remember seeing her stuff so much so, which actually, Laura, I didn't tell this to you, but I remember seeing things that you would do with like back in the day because your product line has evolved, but you had like these rings and it was a way in which you would like clasp things together. I don't really remember exactly, but what I will say is I remember being on vacation and I had this idea in my head that I wanted to be able to knit something where instead of it being a continuous flow, that let's say the strips or the patches of knit work were actually held together by metal rings, like lightweight metal rings. I had no idea how the hell I was going to make this work, but I'm telling you, I was like, I remember I was on vacation because I had time to kind of like screw around with things. And that weird inspiration was actually from seeing your stuff early on and just loving that combination of knitwear and metal and like jewelry, but like again, functionality. So I had it in my head, that maybe this was something I could come up with. I mean, of course, I never really finished it, but I'm telling you, I had this whole concept idea in my head, and it was really all as a result of seeing your stuff early on. So I've really always admired your stuff, but I think much like we all know, as a one woman show, so to speak, even though I am blessed, to have help here, you just kind of get lost in the sauce, right? And so, as much as I probably should have a long time ago, reached out, it just takes us to all be in the same room together, for things to happen. So I was so excited to finally get a chance to actually chat with you. And of course, very quickly after we left, I told you I was going to carry your stuff. We talked about a couple of shows, and it's been amazing for us, I will say, having your jewelry in addition, your fasteners, having that in addition to our knitwear, showing people how to use it, not as great as you can, but it's really actually been a big seller for us. So I just want to say thank you to you, of course, for that, because, it's great to be always ever evolving in terms of what we can offer our people, our shoppers, our clients. So that's my introduction to you. But as I ask everybody when we're kind of starting this out, picture you're at a party, the ever famous question of like, oh, who are you and what do you do? So, what is your kind of like 2-minute introduction of yourself at a party?
Well, I don't really go to parties, but
Picture.
it's a party. We'll just say this is the party. So when people ask me that question, you know, I don't really, I used to be a lot more comfortable with that question when I was in academia, because I was trained as an anthropologist and I did my PhD fieldwork in Indonesia. That's how I ended up connected to my artisans. And so people would say, oh, what do you do? And I'd say, oh, I'm a visiting assistant professor and my research is on blah, blah, blah. And, then I left academia and I had feels about that, like conflicted feelings about it. And it took me a long time actually to be able to say I'm a designer. I think it's taken me like 10 years. I can say it now. But it's taken me like 10 years. And if people say, no, you're an artist, I'll be like, no, I'm definitely not an artist.
Interesting.
I'll say I'm a designer, but not an artist. even though, you know, I draw and I do different things, but it's been, I think because I didn't go to art school. I had wanted to when I was young, and I didn't go to art school. And so I kind of ended up here doing this entrepreneurial thing that's got a creative piece, and kind of, you know, still feel a little like an imposter. But if I'm going to just, if we're not at a party and we're at a show, then I would say, well, JUL Design specializes in styling solutions. And those styling solutions fall into like 4 major chunks. And the JUL is solidly within the sustainable fashion or ethical fashion, slow fashion space, because the closures, clasps, and jewelry that we produce help you, the knitter, crocheter, maker, to get more out of what you're making and to amplify the style and wearability, comfort and function of everything else that you're making. That's the goal, is to get those knits out of the drawer, out of the closet, out of a pile, and onto your body feeling amazing. That's the goal.
I love it. I love it. Now, of course, like immediately as a result of that, I'm like, let's style. But no, we're not going to, because my brain is already like, let's go all the way back, because again, I know nothing about you. So, okay, you graduate high school and then you just blurred so quickly over it, which is perfect because now we're going to go back. So, what did you, so you mentioned what you went to school for, what your degree was in, like what were your intentions then when you first got out of school? Like where were you headed, or obviously did head?
Well, I wanted to go to art school, but I didn't go to art school. So right out of college, I worked in the theater for a little while making costumes. So I was an avid sewer from the time I was little. Learned to knit when I was 7. Learned to weave when I was 5 on a loom that my dad made for me and my sister out of a milk crate, like basically a wooden box. He created a loom for us, and we made our first weavings on that. And then my mother was a spinner and learned to do that. She did, we saved onion skins for years under the sink, you know, to hand dye our stuff with, and goldenrod, we always had to gather that. And, you know, that was sort of working with fiber and fabrics was in the genetic, it was in the DNA kind of, and definitely there is like, it seems like it's in the nature and it's also in the nurture, you know, but we got it from both parents and grandparents. And so
So
I
what did
was
you end up
doing,
going to school for?
well, I didn't go to art school because my
Right.
parents got a divorce. They were like, no, but nobody was going to pay for it. And I got into Carnegie Mellon, and like, it's not cheap. So it's like, okay, I'm not going to art school. And I had this idea. In high school, I had gone on a trip to Greece and I'd learned some Greek. I had started learning Greek. And I had this idea that I wasn't going to go to school. I was just going to go to Greece.
Oh, okay.
I went to this town on Crete called Rethymnon, and I met these lace makers. Like, this is a whole other life that would have been so cool to have. I met these women, these old women. To me, they were old. I was a kid. They were probably my age now. Um, I met these women and they were making lace. And I was like, I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna go there. And like they kind of took me in a little bit. And then I introduced my whole group that I was with to those ladies. And they connected us to these musicians. The fact that I went and found them turned into like a kind of like a cultural, a richer cultural experience that our group had than we would have had otherwise. So I had this notion that I was going to go to Greece and I was going to go to those lace makers in Rethymnon, and I was going to kind of show up and say, teach me how to do this stuff. And I just want to be with you. and, and of course, my mother was terrified by that idea. So She forged an application to the University of Maryland for me. She forged it and
Okay.
sent, she's like, you were accepted.
Oh,
Please
to
go.
meaning to keep you from running off to Greece.
Yes, my mother forged the application. So I'm, being a really good girl, you wouldn't think like, oh, she's gonna run off to Greece and to find some lace makers. But that's a pretty like tame conservative vision of bucking convention. But I have that like follow the rules kind of personality, I guess, kind of, kind of. And so she was like, no, you got in, you're going. And I was like, okay. So I've never been back to Greece. I never went back ever. Despite having this whole like vision of a life living with the lace makers on Crete. So I got an English degree.
Oh my God, I think
And
everyone will have to correct me. I literally think you're our third person who got an English degree and then like is now in the fiber industry. That's hysterical.
yeah, I got an English degree, but I still had like when I wanted to go to art school, I was like, I was sewing all this stuff. I was making all my clothes at that age, all of my clothes, and lots of hand embellishment and like applique and punto and like embroidery and so I was making all my clothes, kept making all my clothes all through college. Then I got a job at Arena Stage Repertory Theater in the costume shop, but their pay structure was so bad. It was like really bad. And I was like, I can't support myself on this wage as much as I love this. So I got a job as an administrative assistant at a scientific journal. That did pay the rent. And then I went back to school for a PhD in anthropology.
Where does that come from? Like you're like, oh,
Well,
I was an administrative assistant and then I went back to school for a PhD in anthropology.
yeah. Well, because remember, I wanted to go to Greece to live
Well,
with
that's
lace
right.
makers.
I mean, so was this idea still in the back of your head that you were still gonna like travel off to like far off lands?
Clearly, because that's what I did. But when I started the PhD, the reason I wanted to go there is because I had seen this amazing exhibition of textiles from Indonesia at the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. And the textiles are extraordinary from Indonesia. They are absolutely amazing. I just happen to have an example right here. This is, I don't know if you can see it very well. This is a supplementary weft textile that sort of, you can see the light glinting off the supplementary weft, the fibers that are, oh, let's see, can I get it? There you
There we
go.
go. We see that now.
Yeah, and this is
Gorgeous.
a textile, a hand woven textile from Bali that it's a contemporary textile. And this is crude compared to the stuff I saw in that exhibition, which were extremely fine, like royal um, textiles that were used in ceremonies for princes and stuff, and had been collected. And there's econ and this kind of supplementary weft textiles that were inspired by very early Indian weaving technologies, and then embroidery. And I was just so like, oh, that's so great. I want to go do that. I want to go study all that stuff. And so the fiber was in there, the fiber was in there, but also this curiosity of like wanting to go, where it was really different. And I wanted to have a kind of life adventure. And so I did. I learned the language, studied the culture. And Indonesia, it's like the width of the United States, but 14,000 islands instead of one big landmass. And there are like 400 odd ethno-linguistic groups in the archipelago. And most of it is Islamic because Java is the biggest island and that's 80% of the population right there. But I worked on this little island that you've heard of, I'm sure, that's at the southern tip of Java called Bali.
Oh my gosh.
And Bali is Hindu. And that's where I worked. I was studying Hindu Balinese cosmology and ideas about the relationship between the universe and the human body, which are considered to be basically the same thing, but the universe is a big version and the human body is a small version. And I was really fascinated by that relationship, and also, you know, it ends up informing how you understand textiles and like everything. Everything ends up relating back to that relationship that is understood to inform everything. So that's what I did there. And that's how I met my collaborator, who has been working with me for now 15 years.
Well, and yeah,
And
and I knew somewhere the story obviously, would connect, meaning because I know even just from now carrying, your beautiful jewelry that you did say it's made in Indonesia, but so in a sense though, so where, okay, so that's obviously you were there, you were working there, completely engrossed in the culture there. And how long did you live there?
I lived there for my PhD field research that contributed to the content of my dissertation. And then the things that I did after that before I left academia, that main chunk of field work was for 2 years. And then many trips back for like 3 months back, I'd go back to do more research for 3 months. And then I lived in Australia for a year doing a postdoc, and then went back to Indonesia for 3 months. And, it was like
Right.
going back over and over. And
And so
yeah,
ultimately,
and I like,
when you were done, you taught in academia.
yeah.
You were a
And then I
professor
left
of what? Anthropology?
cultural anthropology. Mhm.
Where did you teach?
I had a postdoc at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And it was at that, and then I got an offer to go to Tulane,
Oh, wow.
and I declined it. I didn't go because it was a temporary position.
Mhm.
And I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't go, and I'll tell you why. Because if I had gone, I would have been there when Katrina happened.
Interesting.
And the woman who did go, who took that job, she lost everything.
Wow.
I would have been there with my little boy, who was 5.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, they say, right? Like everything in life, you don't know sometimes, the
Yeah,
decisions that are either made for you or that you choose to make, and whether they seem right or wrong in the moment, there's
yeah,
always a reason. I feel there's always a higher power, there's and
yeah.
you might not see it until 10 years down the road or whatever the case may be.
I
So,
know. I felt like there was my son. My son um didn't want, like, it was a visiting assistant. It was another visiting assistant professorship, because when you're in academia, especially I think in the humanities, if you're not some kind of rock star for some reason, or you have the most fabulous collection, and of course if you're male, it really helps to be male. or doing like the sexiest new topic, which that's always changing. Otherwise, you go through this series of positions that are temporary positions. So you're somewhere for 2 years or 1 year. And a 1 year position is really a 9-month position. And my son didn't want to, he was like, we've been in Australia and Charlottesville, which is where my alma mater was, because I went to the University of Virginia. And then we were in Illinois, we were there for 2 years. And so I was talking to him about this. I guess he wasn't 5, he was 7. talking to him about what my opportunities were, and he was so adamant that he was so done moving. He was really tired. He really wanted to stay in Illinois. But I didn't, there wasn't a position for me at Illinois, and my postdoc ended. So my sister had just started Noni Patterns. I don't know if any of you know.
That's what I was
Noni.
going to say along the way. Yeah, I don't know that people know who your sister is and what she does. So yeah, why don't you introduce that part?
Yeah, so she's just finally closed Noni, but she had just launched Noni and she had just gone viral for her felted bags and felted flowers. And she asked for my help. And one of the ways she wanted my help was she said, the bag hardware options, sorry if that's loud. She said the bag hardware and handle options that are available in the US are really super boring. Can you get something made? And this is when I was still doing my academic thing. And I was like, yes, I can totally do that. I I'm sure I can find artisans because Bali is well known for having a tremendous kind of silver metal thing. They're very artistic. The culture is very ornamentation oriented, and so there are lots of artisans with specializations in wood carving and textiles and silversmithing and goldsmithing and like stone carving. Like there are villages that have specializations in these different areas, and so I was like, I'm sure I can. I'm confident I can work that out. So I did. I did find somebody. I found workshops. I found Agus, who's now still my collaborator, and and I started that for her. And then I ended up, when I left academia, because she wanted my help, and I had a project, I thought, well, I'll just continue working on this. I was writing grants and I was in like I didn't end up getting that grant, but I almost got the grant. Like I was on the short list for consideration, but then didn't get it. But I was after I left academia, I was still doing the research and the writing and still applying for that research opportunity or that fellowship opportunity and getting the stuff for her. And so that and the bag stuff that I got was so beautiful that when I first showed it to people in the kind of the wholesale store owner context, they said, "Oh my God, this is so gorgeous. I wish it were a shawl pin." And I was like, light bulb went on and I was like, "For you, shawl pin, I will make it." And that's how it started.
Now, did it get to where you decided, is there kickback on your side, Laura? Can you hear
Is
my
there
voice?
what?
There was a little bit of kickback on your side. I can hear my voice echoing, so I didn't know whether you happen to have something else on your end.
No.
Okay. So when you were still doing academia, you started doing this. So it's kind of like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Meaning, did you see this growing in people's interests, and so then you decided to go in that path, or had something else occurred that closed academia for you, and then you just took off with JUL Designs?
I didn't get that grant.
Okay.
The fellowship opportunity that I was applying for that would have allowed me to write the book that I was doing research on. I didn't get it.
And then you were no longer teaching at that time, or?
No, because I didn't take that position at Tulane. I
Okay, got
came
it.
back and thought, okay, I'm gonna keep, if I get this grant, I'll go do the research, I'll write the book, I'll keep doing this whole thing. But I didn't get the grant, and my sister needed her business was kind of exploding, and she really needed my help, and so I just I just fell in this other
Now,
path.
how
So
long ago was
I
that?
didn't
Because
really
you've
make
been
work,
doing
but
this for a long time. So how long ago was that?
that was in 2006 when I left.
Okay.
And then I kind of was really helping her a lot, and helping her make samples of bags and And then I would say really launched my business in 2008.
Well, that's a long time.
It's been a while.
So now the relationship you mentioned with your partner. Well, first, let's start out. Why don't we let people know? Only because I just by happenstance know. So the JUL Designs, where did that come from? Where did JUL come from?
Yeah, I didn't want to name my business after myself. Um, my son is Julian, and I have always called him Jewel. And just Jul, just Jewel. And I thought that was a pretty kind of play on words because it sounds like Jewel, but it's not. And um, yeah, that's where it came from.
Well, and am I correct in that a lot of people do think that that's your name?
Oh, people do call me Jewel all the time. Yeah. And actually, it's funny because Julian and I were talking yesterday or the day before, because he went to art school. He really did go to art school.
Where did he go to school?
He went for a year at the California College of the Arts and then came back and finished up at Maryland Institute College of Art.
And what does he do?
Oh my God, he can do anything he wants to do. He's so multi-talented. When he was little, anything that I would learn that was related to metalworking, I'd be like, "Oh, you want to see how to cut metal with a little tiny saw? Oh, you want to know how to rivet stuff with these little tiny tools and wire and stuff? Oh, you want to learn how to make things in wax that we can get cast into metal?" Because I was learning how to do all this stuff that that we do to make these things. I didn't want to be stupid talking to my artisans. So I learned how to pierce stuff. I learned how to rivet stuff. I learned how to carve wax. I learned how to cast metal. I learned how to do all of it. And so I taught him. So he's like 8, making these really amazing, cool things. And when I got the sewing machine, the big industrial sewing machine to sew leather to make bags and stuff, I was like, okay, I'm going to show you how to use the machine. But if you mess up the tension, you're going to have to call the company yourself to figure out what you did. And of course, he messed up the tension right away, and he called the company himself, and he figured out. So he's never messed it up again. And now he's an amazing leather worker. He's an amazing woodworker. He's an amazing metal worker. He does really cool things with lighting, and he can do anything he wants. And I mean, his drawings are excellent, but that's not his. He's more of a 3D guy, and his photography is amazing. So yeah,
Well, it's obviously genetic. And again, just like you said before, it's obviously nature and nurture, right? So not only being in the environment growing up with you, as well as probably genetically just, having the aptitude for the arts. So that's really cool.
yeah.
Well, I know, I wanted to make like that segue, but so I'm really interested in hearing, and I'm sure everyone else is as well, in terms of your collaborator that you mentioned and how that relationship developed, and then really more importantly having everybody have an understanding then of how the process happens at this point, like what gets done there versus what gets done here, so that way people have a better perspective of your
Yeah.
product. And I think what's most important, probably to you, to me as well, is people understanding that relationship and that it's not just, oh, it's being done overseas, so really, explaining, that relationship, the collaboration, and the product end of it.
Well, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about how I first met Agus. His name is Agus Budi Astradi. And he's Balinese. And I can't remember how old he is, maybe almost 40. He's married. He has a little boy. He wasn't married with a child when we first met. He was young, in his 20s, I guess. 25, maybe. Does that work out? Yeah, that's probably about right. And it occurs to me that I know a goose because of Julian. and I'll tell, it's a circuitous connection. When Julian was little, like he was really little, he was like 1 when we went to do my field research. And Julian's half Balinese, his father's Balinese. We were in the tropical medicine office to get our inoculations for the trip. And a guy came in to wait in the waiting room, and I thought, that guy's gotta be Balinese. I was just thinking that, looking at this guy who came in. Well, Julian was a new walking toddler, newly walking, and he went over to interact with this man. And the man, who later became a very close friend, had his keys, and he went like this to make them rattle and for them to be interesting. And so Julian went over and started interacting with him. And then we got called in, we got our inoculations, and but then later we ended up talking to him before we left. Or I ended up talking to him. Julian wasn't talking yet. And and I wanted to know if he was Balinese, and then yes, indeed, he was Balinese. And he was like, tell me your story. And I said, well, I've got some grants. I'm going to go over. I'm going to do this research. And like, oh, what are you going to do your research? I'm going to do my research on dance and the human body and stuff. And he's like, oh, I'm a dancer. It's like, oh my God. Okay. And he's like, I know some people you need to go find. You need to go meet them. And so I got the information, and I dutifully, because I follow what people tell me to do sometimes. I went to the far eastern part of Bali, and I met the guy that he told me to go meet, and that guy helped me and connected me to some other people, and I ended up living in this village, so now I have a network, right?
While dragging a 1-year-old around, mind you. I mean, that is so pivotal that you are doing
Yeah.
all of this, I'm assuming alone
With a
and
baby.
with a
Yeah.
child, which is amazing.
Uh-huh. On my hip. I just carried him. I always carried him. I never had a stroller. I mean, if you tried to do a stroller in Bali, I think terrible things would happen. We don't have sidewalks. When they do, they like precipitously drop into, gutters. And so, yeah, I had Julie, I often think about that. I think sometimes, he's 26 now, and I think, gosh, if he were just a baby and I could take him somewhere with me, I would feel so safe. And I've said to him, when, like, if he was on my hip, I could do anything. I felt like he was my protection. Like he put a force field of energy around us that meant that nothing bad could happen. And it was like that. Like having Julian on my body, in my arms, like I could do anything. And so sometimes I think, oh, if Julian were just little, I could go do something brave. Like,
I don't think you want to try
oh,
carrying him anymore.
but I'd love to move to Spain. Gosh, if Julian were small, I'd just do it. So I later, Wayan, this friend who Julian met, he came and found me in the village that I ended up living in Bali. He was getting his education here. He came back. He came back to Bali. He came back to he went back and forth several times. And he's the one who gave a goose to me. He knew, I asked him, Wayan, can you help me find someone who can do this work I'm interested in doing? And he said, I know somebody. So he brought a goose to me, and he said, I titip. Titip means like menitip. The root is titip is the word in Indonesian. active verb money to it's not like bequeath, it's like to give. He's like, I'm giving him to you. It's not a concept we have here, but it's a way of saying, I'm giving you this relationship as like a gift.
Mhm.
And he's gonna come do this with you because I'm asking him to. And I'm getting him to do that because you asked me to. You know, it's like, it's a it's a whole complex kind of series of obligations and responsibilities that are in that process of when you tip somebody, it's a big deal. And so Agus has been with me ever since. And I wouldn't have known Wayan if my son had not gone to talk to him. And Julian's like that. Julian, since he was like 3 weeks old, has just been like, I'm ready to embrace the world. Like when he was little, he would make eye contact with somebody and they would smile at him because he was such a beautiful child. I mean, he's a beautiful young man, but like people would stop me on the street and say, oh my God, this is the most beautiful child I've ever seen. And so he had this attractive power that people in Bali recognized, people here commented on it all the time. And he would make eye contact with somebody and he'd look back at me and he'd say, that's my friend now. And so he's just like,
His energy draws people in.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially, you know, I think when a little child is so socially open in a charismatic, beautiful way, like not naughty, but just like, I wanna be friends with you, and I'm gonna ask you, a grown-up, about your violin or, you know, whatever. Like he would always, when I would take him to a concert or something, he would go during the intermission down to the front of the theater and he would make friends with the whole orchestra. And then he would, for the second, you know, interlude, he would say, Mommy, come meet my friends. And he'd come down and he'd say, you know, he'd tell me what everybody did and introduce me to everybody. And so it's been many times since he came into my life that he has made a connection for me that has turned out to be really important. And that's so cool. And then, you know, I took it back too. It's not like it's always been that Julian has led me in some really great direction. Like I made sure that he met people who then turned out to be people who wanted to give him jobs or whatever. It's usually supposed to go like that, but in his case, he has this kind of really amazing charisma that has meant that I've gotten opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Now it's a goose, right? Am I saying it correctly? So he's Balinese. And so I'm
Mhm.
assuming because you can speak the language, so you're able to communicate with him easily in terms
Yeah,
of trying to explain to him what you're looking to do. And so as this relationship forms and you know, like I guess maybe help paint a picture for us in the beginning, you know, because I think of it from more of a business point of view as well as an artistic point of view. But okay, so logistically, you know, you're having him make stuff. Is it because the resources are there that this culture and is rich in what you're looking for? And then what are the logistics of having him make things? Is the full production done in Indonesia and then he ships you the product? And you know, of course, my business mind
yeah,
again, how does that work in terms of getting things from Indonesia to the US? You don't just get to be like, oh, I'm going to just ship this over. I mean, I'm sure that there are things that you had to go through in order to make that happen back and forth.
yeah. Mostly now we use video chat to work on designs because he was trained as a jewelry designer. And so he he has all of the relationships with our artisans, the workshops that we use, and so he liaises with them. And but he's creating the design that then gets given to our wax worker or fabricator. So like this design, which you have,
Mhm.
that's the third eye chakra. He made a drawing first, and then he gave the drawing to the wax worker, and the wax worker carved it in hard wax. And then it got cast into silver. And then the silver was molded so that more waxes could be made of this same thing.
Mm.
And then every time we want to make it, it becomes a wax first, and then it gets cast into metal.
Mm.
And then it gets sent to another workshop where they do the fine polishing and add the blackening so that there's good detail and the dimension is really clear. And then he and his wife do the quality control. And then they pack it up and ship it to me. And it's, a bag full of these rings and a bag full of these sticks, and they get combined here. And the leather strap that is also on the product that you buy from me, for example, the leather piece, I do it here. Everything that's leather happens here. And
Including
all of
the rivets, including like the snaps and all of
all
that.
all that happens right over there. All that happens there. And then the final, so like when you get our stud button components that you have,
Mhm.
these guys, if it's gonna, there
There
you
you
go, the ancient geometry. The metal part is cast in Indonesia, and then the leather part is cut out here in the US, and then it's put together into a product here in the studio.
Now, in the beginning,
And
when you first worked with the goose in the beginning, was it just, I'm curious, like kind of how it's evolved, I think maybe more with respect to how it helps him and the people in Indonesia, meaning when you guys first started, was it literally just him and you, or from the beginning, was there always craftsmen
artists,
on his end?
yes,
So there was.
always
But
there were.
as he's
Yep.
grown, has the number of people that are involved on the side in Indonesia, has that changed at all?
It's a lot more people. When we first started, our first product was a filigree ring, and it was and in the beginning, each one was handmade. Every single one was completely handmade. All of the filigree was put on top of the metal and then soldered. The filigree was soldered by hand. And then later we started, it was like, that took forever. It took so long. Oh my gosh. And so I was like, we have to be able to speed this up, and we have to be able to do it cheaper. And so like I found a pewter casting place here that could make a cheaper, heavier, different price point product for me. And I had a casting house I was using here for a while. He retired, so we had to shift then just everything to Bali. And so yeah, the process has changed. We've gone through different materials and workshops that we've used. The materials have become available to us that then became unavailable to us. But I would say like the main thing that changed over the course of time was the way that Agus and I interact and the way that he relates to me. And yeah, I think because there's a category of relationship. It's very hierarchically organized socially there. I'm older than he is. I have more education than he does. The US is kind of a high status place in general, because if you can go there, then the idea is you must have money and access in a way that people who can't leave Bali do, they don't feel they have. So there are all of these assumptions that are operating in the way that people think about those relationships. And then I was the one who was controlling the commerce and supplying the money and placing the order and, had the customers here and whatever, managing the marketplace into which our goods were going to be circulating. And that relationship should be one in which he is my anak buah. So I'm the tree and he's my fruit child. Anak means child or person. Buah means fruit. So like I'm the tree and he's my fruit. The relationship of the source and the anak buah is such that the anak buah should always take direction from the source. But of course I wasn't there, so I couldn't say, oh, do this and do that and do this and do something else. And so sometimes I would say, oh, where are our goods from such and such a producer? Why aren't you sending that to me yet? It seems like it's been taking so long. And he'd say, oh, I'm so embarrassed to go. We owe them money. And I'd be like, why do we owe them money? Why aren't you paying? And he'd say, because you didn't tell me to. And I was like, I had no idea about any of this. But of course, the tree is supposed to tell the fruit what to do. And so finally, okay, I need you not to be an nagbua. I
Yes,
need
don't be a fruit anymore.
be a co-tree, please. If you know that they need to be paid, tell me how much, and I'll send the money. So that took a while to work out because he was working within the cultural framework of being the submissive underling. And I wasn't thinking of him that way, but he was operating, so it took a while and he had to get over all kinds of feels about violating cultural norms that in the Balinese context would have been terrible for him to violate, but it had to happen for our relationship to work.
Now, I'm curious with regards to their culture, was there all an issue that as the tree you are a woman, or that's not significant for them?
I think because I'm older than he is, that worked all right. I'm older and because I had the education, so I was the doctor because I was already because I had the PhD and had that status and I had associations with the university there and stuff. Like I had a status level that and he was younger, so it worked okay. If I had been like a 20-year-old woman in a marriageable category in relation to him, maybe that would have been kind of problematic in some ways because
Yeah, I was just curious
there-
because obviously cultures are different.
yeah, and there are these times when it switches, like when we've traveled in Indonesia together because like we went to Sumatra together because we were interested in investigating the possibility of doing something with Sumatran fabrics. We didn't end up doing it, but I think we didn't really have enough time to solidify that. And then we visited a casting house in Java because we wanted to look at like larger scale castings, and we didn't find the right people. And it's hard to do that kind of. It's hard to like find workshops quickly unless you know somebody. And we didn't have those relationships in these other islands, and we didn't meet the right people quickly enough to put it in place. But there, in those travel situations where it was me and Agus and Julian, who was littler then, Agus felt responsible for me as the man, the adult man traveling with a woman and a child. So he felt like it was his job to be protective And that was really stressful for him. So it always, whenever he's traveled with us, he gets sick. And it's like, really, Auguste, you don't have to feel quite so responsible. But he did. He just did.
Yeah. No, I was curious, and again, because there's all those different things and the cultural diversities and,
Yeah.
not that it's problematic, but like you said, it just adds to the equation of the, relationship if you,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so when you started all of this, I mean, this is going to be kind of like a big open-ended question. Well, actually, first, my first, again, I'm so curious because for the process, so let's say in terms of how long it takes, just even for production, because I always think it's interesting for people to understand. You don't just get to be like, hey, Auguste, I need more of XYZ. So what is your lead time when you are thinking about needing to restock whatever it is that you have? How long does it take them over on their side? And then, of course, in terms of getting it to you, I'm curious how you have to plan that out.
3 months.
Okay. Which is not
If,
too bad in the scope of life, but you can't
if
just
I
be in
mess
an
up,
emergency.
I know. If I mess up and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't realize we were so low on such and such, or something happens and nobody talks to me, but somebody uses something on a design and then 100 pieces fly out the door all of a sudden where they've been going out in dribs and drabs for a while. I'm like, oh, then I'm out of stock for 3 months.
Yeah.
And product development is going to be very slow. Like the stud button components, these guys took a long time. I had this concept, and part of it is there are these ways in which I end up being slow, and I just wish this weren't my personality, but it is for whatever reason. I had the concept, and it took me a while. Why does it take me a while? I don't know. It took me a while to think through the dimensions. The dimension between the top of the metal part, here,
Mhm.
the length of the shaft, the dimensions of the bead, the diameter of the shaft, and what's the maximum total weight? What would people feel comfortable wearing? How much space do we need for the knitwear? And then how does that relate to strengths of materials, minimum casting diameter that will fill with molten metal? There's all this stuff that you kind of have to keep in play in your brain while you're developing the design concept and establishing the dimensions that will give you enough information to get proof of concept, to start with the artisans. Because if you say, oh, I've got this idea and I kind of wanted this and I kind of wanted that, and maybe it should be this, and they'd be like, that's great. Can you get back to me when you have a drawing with some sizes and shapes? And we could use some dimensions.
Something a little more concrete.
Something specific. And if you're there, like if I'm there, I can go to the workshop and we can kind of hang out there and talk about it, debate, look at how something works. And we have a video on the website somewhere, I think, where we're talking about hooks and eyes and how the hook and eye should be structured. And because I was there, we could hand components to the artisan and say, try it like this. And he'd come back and we'd mess around with it and say, oh, that doesn't work. What if we do this other thing? Hand it back.
Mhm.
That's better, but it would really be great if, and we tweak again. If I'm there, we can do that and it's efficient.
Yeah.
But I am almost never there.
That's what I was just going
And
to ask. Do you get back over there at all?
I do, but it's like every 4 to 6 years.
Oh,
Because
wow.
it's a major, like if I go there, you can't just go for 2 weeks. We have to have a project, we have to have a plan, and I have to be there for a while because Julian's half Balinese, so we've got all these family obligations with his relatives there. And then we've got to go see all my friends and my former colleagues and then there's going to be some big ceremony because they're doing these Hindu ceremonies and we're going to have to get all dressed up in silks and lace and high-heeled sandals to go do that and get holy water and stuff. You know, it's like, and everything takes forever. Just getting somewhere, and then you have to sit down and you have to have coffee, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, you haven't been here in so long, and look, you're old now, and now we're gonna call you Granny." And, you know, you have to go through, and you know, if I go somewhere where I used to live out in Eastern Indonesia or Eastern Bali, you know, one of the things that ends up happening now that it's been quite some time since my first time I lived there is people tell me everybody who's died. That we sit down, the coffee and the snacks come, and then the recitation of deaths begins. Oh, remember Pat Wayan, you used to study with him, remember? And you would study those palm leaf manuscripts on medicines and love magic. Oh, he died. Oh, remember so-and-so who used to do whatever? He died too. Oh, it was terrible. He was sorcerized, you know, and it's a lot of stories about envy and family drama and yeah. So you have to go for at least a month.
I was gonna say either that or maybe the other way around. It is too bad that you can't get there more often so that it's not so ceremonious every time you go, right?
Well, that's true, but man, it's a long trip.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine. So this
I
is
mean,
my
it's
open. Oh, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. I just, so the question I had wanted to ask you before, of course, I needed to get my business sense in of just so curious about how it gets from there to here. But so more open-ended, if you were to look at the beginning of your business when you first started and your creations then to where you are now, has it always been on the same path? I mean, I know as an artisan, as a maker, like we were talking even with Julia yesterday, you know, none of us want to, even myself as a yarn designer, I don't want to make the same yarns over and over. I don't want to look at the same thing over and over. You have your tried and trues, you know, that stay the course, but then there's always trying something new or phasing something out. But so when you started, was it always the shawl pins, or I just feel like I've seen different things over the years. So where did you start to where you are now? I mean, I know the concept's still the same, but do you feel like you could recognize any kind of difference or evolution or something that you feel is worthwhile, you know, mentioning in that sense?
You know, I think early on, well, I mean, there was the whole connection to my sister's business. So the bag handles and bag hardware thing that was happening. But then I was doing my shawl pins. And part of, I was really interested in making what I thought were beautiful objects. And I wanted people to buy them. That was not enough after a while. Um, and in fact, it became not at all what I wanted to do in some ways because it began to, from an environmental perspective, it started to feel problematic. I don't want just to be contributing to some kind of excess or making things that people will find they don't need. What I realized I wanted to do was make something that reduced excess, that reduced waste, And so what I felt I was engaging then with intellectually was with what people were telling me about the moments when they make something, they go to try it on, and it fails. And that disappointment and that kind of like, why? Why can't I get this thing to work on my body? Why doesn't it look right? Why does it fall off? What's wrong with me? I heard this over and over and over. This frustration. And that's become my focus. And not just that, but trying to think through this, and this is where styling comes in, which isn't something I sell. I sell the tool that will make the styling work, but the concept.
W- We've lost your voice. I'm not sure why, Laura.
Does that work?
Yes, now
Yeah.
we've got you.
I'm worried now that that might mean that my camera's low on battery. Let me look.
All right, no worries. Do what you've got to do. And Jillian, I do see your question there. So kind of while we're waiting for her to just make some adjustments. And again, guys, as I can, we'll try to address those types of things. I mean, very soon I will set Laura off into what she does, talking about some of the things that are my favorites. So we're able to plug yourself in there.
Well, I want to change the battery. Now it's not even focusing. I think it's low on battery. I'm going to have to turn off the camera.
Okay.
I think you'll be able to hear me. I'm going to turn off the camera and switch the battery.
All right, no worries. You do what you got to do so that way we don't lose you, because I know everybody is super interested in the conversation. And, again, guys, a lot of this for me is just the natural curiosity of wanting you guys to understand the person behind the brand. We can all look at what it is that she makes, but I think, like with anything, even myself, telling the story behind my brand so that people have a better understanding. I certainly understand that when people first look at the yarns and, there's maybe sticker shock or not understanding the different types of lines, that we carry and what they each represent. So the story and the opportunity that I have when people come into the booth or when I have this kind of platform, that's why it's so important to me, because sometimes what might seem like in the beginning, I just don't think that I can do this or even afford that, or this doesn't appeal to me. When all of a sudden you get the story behind it, or you have a better understanding about the cost of something, then that gives you a greater sense of appreciation for the right person. And look, there's people out there that that's not going to make a difference to. But I feel like that's what's so important to me, is the storytelling, because again, as we've said over and over again, none of us are doing this and making $1 million. And more importantly, for myself as well, which I know Laura touched on just a little bit, the whole concept of slow fashion versus fast fashion. I'm ever so pleased when I hear somebody say to me, I've been eyeing this up, or I've been saving up for a year, or I saw this last year and I just can't get it out of my mind. And, I'm going to make the purchase this year. It makes you think, which means that you're making a more conscious purchase, which again, everything that Laura's talking about in terms of not wanting people to just buy to buy, but to buy with a purpose and know that you have a project in hand, or know that you are, making a contribution. I mean, even if you don't have a project in hand, but you're making a contribution to, what we both do, the stories that Laura's talking about. I think it's so important to have an understanding of the contribution to the communities that she's utilizing, in Bali. So, that's why we do these things. And so I know you guys are anxious, of course, to, see her do her fun, fantabulous things, with all of her different product designs. But, again, that's why I was curious about, the evolution and where she is at now, because, right, we all start in one place. And regardless of what business person tells you, you're supposed to have a 5-year plan, 10-year plan, I don't really know that many people that do. And even when you do, it's meant to crinkle up and throw away and start over again. Because if you're truly doing this because you're following your passion, then you just kind of roll with it, and the world takes you where it's meant to be, and that's the same when I was talking to Carol back on our very first day of the 12 days of Christmas, and I said I bought 2 llamas and they were boys because I didn't need girls because I was never going to breed. So you never know where you're going to end up in that sense. But thank you for making that adjustment, and I'm glad that we were able to save you before you died.
Something about the camera's microphone's not working, but I think my speaker works as a microphone. Is it working? Can you hear
We
me?
can hear you. It's not as clear as it was before, so just maybe project a little bit, but that's okay. So, kind of where you left off was, in a sense, just talking about the styling solutions that you were trying to come up with for people. And if you heard me as I was talking, meaning in terms of just wanting to make a contribution to the fact that you're making something which is going to help people to wear what they already have, making conscious choices. I mean, look, we all know that people are going to make purchases and there's yarn in the bottom of somebody's closet of mine, and that's okay too. And, we all stash bust from time to time. So as long as there's an appreciation for it, I think that's ultimately what's important. So, I know I'd love for you to dive into in the interest of time, some of the different products. I mean, again, they've all sort of had that same concept, but I appreciate just where you ended up saying that, it was really more important for you to also help people, with what they have. Now, I know you have so many different things, but I definitely, just from working with you as of recently in the short time that we have been, I think it's almost endearing that, like anything else, as a maker, when you have something new, that's what you focus on, and in a sense the other things are there, they've been there. I would love to circle back before you get into your stud buttons because they are ingenious and I know they're your baby right now. I when I went through all of your product lines, I mean, there are of course so many different things, and I tried to make selections, as I always do, based on what interests me. And I think that's important because if it's something that I'm involved in, I'm interested in, I'm going to wear, I'm going to use, then that also helps people. And at the same time, then that also means that my heart is genuine in what I'm selling people. I always say I never want to sell people something that I don't believe in. And so I really am drawn to your cuffs. And that's a big one for me. I also love the different designs, and trying to think, like, I always love a little pop of sparkle, a little shine, a little extra something. And so in particular, I have the larger rings and the larger round rings, and then I have the smaller flat ovals, because I recognize everybody might not be as demonstrative as myself. I love, can you talk about the cuffs, kind of how you arrived at that? Also, like, which I'm wearing now, is the woman's wealth. I don't really know what it stands for, but I love the design, and of course I love the name. So I'm just curious in all of that. And I will say, the one thing I want to say is that even happenstance, changing the look of a piece, we were at, we were at Rhinebeck, and this is actually a sort of a triangle poncho that is just super popular for us. It's a workhorse, and it is great because it doesn't bind you like some long poncho. You can move around, you can work with it very easily, but all of a sudden I'm like, I really do just want to, like, kind of pull it up a little bit more so that I'm a little freer. And I just had the idea to take your cuff and weave it through the lace work and cinch up the triangle part of it. And it took us a little bit to get it, because at first I just wrapped it around, and then of course you start moving and the whole thing just fell off to the side. But once I realized to weave it through the lace work, and it doesn't of course do any damage. Anyway, it was just a small little ingenuity on my part, but then all of a sudden people saw me on Instagram and they're like, "Oh my God, that's so cool. Like, that's the poncho." And as you always profess, it just totally changed the look of the piece just by, simply adding. Oh, I've lost your.
Like,
Oh,
one of so important to me is how does it feel on the body, right? Is it comfortable? Because if it's not, it's going to end up balled up and thrown down on the ground. And like, oh my God, this is not working. I can't live my life and be functional and be productive if I have to manage this ill-behaved knitwear all the time. So I call that creative play, what you engaged in. You engaged in a kind of creative play, which is a kind of design work that you did on top of the existing piece to make it feel better on your body. And in so doing, you achieved a new look that's exciting. And that's so perfect. I just love it. That's, yes, yay.
well, I mean, and again, it's just, yeah, I don't know, right? Sometimes we just get these different ideas, or even like we were talking before we started recording, in the lanyards that my friend has hand felted, and they're different lengths, and I wanted to wear one last night, and it was like too long, and literally I was almost late for Zoom because I was just playing around with how can I make this work? Like, how can I style it differently? And, so either way, so talk to us just a little bit about cuffs, this whole, what is this women's wealth? And because again, I really love the cuffs. I love that third eye chakra, especially because it's kind of like a 3-in-1 package. I'm not a shawl pin kind of girl. So, I like that has a couple different concepts and different ways to wear it. I just think the whole thing is ingenious. So I'm just going to let you roll from here. Do what you want about the cuffs. And then I know you want to jump into your babies and your buttons. And, then of course we'll just kind of take it from there. So I know this is where you're going to jump up and start doing your magic.
I'm going to adjust a little here. Otherwise, I'll be cut off if I don't tweak. So the cuff, so a shawl pin will penetrate the fiber, and that's how it holds layers together. The shawl stick does the same thing. Clasps have to be sewn on, so you've got a penetrating the fiber process of attachment there, where you're lacing or sewing the piece on. And the stud buttons and the pedestal buttons go in between the stitches in order to make those connections that secure the piece. The cuff is unique in that it does, although you threaded it in between your lace work, but in general, one of the things that the cuff can do that these other forms cannot is capture volume and not damage fiber. So you're not penetrating, poking through, infiltrating, intruding on the fiber in any way if you don't choose to. You're just grabbing it. And that means that you can even put it on something like this textile where you wouldn't want to penetrate it. And that gives you a whole range of possible, it's fairly simple styling that you're going to get from a cuff, because you can see I've crossed the fabric, because if you cross it, then the cuff won't fall off. And I'm putting women's wealth on it. I'm just going to wrap it more than. This is what happens when I don't put my hair up. Stuck and everything, but the women's wealth component is such a knockout component. It's so striking and jewelry-like. This ornament shape comes from the ethnic Chinese group Miao, and these forms are, in their cultural context, really big. They're huge. And they hold women's textiles onto their bodies, and they're made of solid silver. Imagine something, multiple kilos of silver on their back, holding their handmade, hand-embroidered, hand-dyed textiles that are their ceremonial special textiles that between the textile and these objects, that's a woman's wealth, which is why it's called women's wealth. And it's an inalienable wealth that belongs to her. And, you know, historically, we see this globally, that women's jewelry would be their wealth. They couldn't own lands necessarily, or wouldn't have rights to their children, but their jewelry and their fabric constituted their wealth. And so that's what that's referring to. The name of that refers to them.
I also love when I met you as well, that you will even use, especially the woman's wealth. I saw you wearing it as a choker, which I would so do. And then at the same time, it's also the perfect length that you can wrap it around as wearing it as like a cuff or a bracelet, which I always tend to have, you know, big, huge silver metal things on. So I love that, you know, that there's even other ways in which you can use it, and not just even with your knitwear, it can, you know, act as actual jewelry. So I love that part of it as well.
I almost brought a few things over from the other side, but there was it was not the women's wealth, but there's another component that is a W-shaped component, and it takes these filigree charms, like this little guy. And a woman came up and she was wearing her cuff with that W-shaped component and a dragonfly as a choker. Oh, it looked so good on her. She was like, oh, I love it, so good. She just wore it as a pendant, and it looks really, really great. And that, you know, I get so excited. It's like your innovation with threading that cuff in between the different lacy elements of your piece. I intended it to, like, you know, capture all of the fabric, and you were like, well, no, I need something else to stabilize the location of this piece, so I'm going to innovate it in this other way. And then, you know, it adds to the use that you can get out of that component and also your shawl. And that's just so perfect. That is exactly what I love to see is more like an expansion of the range of possible uses for one component, so that there's, you know, so there's less waste, so that the potential utility of each thing gets really maxed out. That's what I love to see. I love it.
Actually, I'm already sitting here and I'm like, I have another idea now, because I have this cowl that has like a diamond lace pattern in it. And I keep saying, actually, the first thing is I need to try your stud buttons with it. I'll be doing that before Vogue Knitting Live, because it's like one of those things you either have to seam it up, and then it's kind of like this really tight cowl, which, you know, if you don't want to mess up your hair. But now I'm almost even wondering using this to hook it through the lace pattern on the ends. So I'm like, all right, we got to get done so I can try this.
So here's an example.
Oh, I love those too.
It's a scarf, a skinny scarf. Like, remember all those scarves that we all made back then that aren't getting worn really anymore? But, you know, the fiber's beautiful, but they just, like, who wears a skinny scarf anymore? Just like, there are shapes that have had their day, but if we restyle them in new ways, then we can make them exciting and fresh again. And here's an example. This is married together along the edges all the way around using the stud buttons. And then I'm finishing it with the screw-in women's wealth closure.
Yeah.
To have, you know, have that aesthetic resolution of managing the end.
That is absolutely stunning. And meanwhile, you can just pull it off and on like a little capelet.
I know, and I have to say, it's so comfortable.
They're
Like,
so cool.
It's really comfortable and very warm. Because this is back in the worsted weight days when people knit and worsted all the time. And but pattern on the website too. It's called Furrow in 5 Iterations. There's basically, I give you the welt, the instructions for the welt that are closed at the end. And then there are 5 ideas about what to do with those welts. And of course, you could always come up with other ideas about what to do with the welts once you've got the original, the basic concept. But it works in these 2 colors where you're knitting and then you do the welts, and so you can do 2 colors. And since I did I thought, wouldn't it be really amazing to do this with a solid and a gradient?
We'll have to get going on that.
One of you should do it. I can't do it because I have such terrible arthritis. I can't knit more than 2 rows at a time.
Oh.
It's just really an agony. And so I can't do this anymore.
Well, hey, anytime that you need some help with things like that, I certainly have plenty of people in my artillery. Don't worry, anybody. I'm not volunteering to knit it. You know that. So what else do you have for us? I'm sure you're going to be jumping over to Button Land.
I'll tell you why I love the buttons. It's not just because they're the newest thing.
No, but they are ingenious, I will say. They really are.
So powerful. They are
Well, and if I can just say, because the one thing, so for instance, I love the closure, the screw-in closure that you just showed. I know the one thing about that is like you're married to it, meaning at least for the day, once you put it on, you're in it. But the really cool thing about the buttons is they really are so interchangeable and so quickly.
They're so fast. Yeah, they're really fast to move around. So I wanna, so those of you who have not been introduced to the stud buttons, Tabitha has them in sets of 3, and I of course have them in sets of 3. But I also have them singly. So like if you were to get a set of 3 and then decide that you really needed 4, you can. It's possible. The way they work is they are, okay, let's see, will it focus?
There you go.
There we go. It's a metal component with a leather backing. So there's the back. So it's got a shaft that says stitches wrap around, because this is going in between the stitches and this ends up on the back of your fabric, this bead. And then the bead snaps into this symmetrical buttonhole. Like this. You hear that pop? That's the snapping. And then it's an oval shaped backing. And so the tendency when it's under tension is that it would pull like this, and that actually closes those little slits. So it makes it more secure under tension. And so when you want to use it, then you just figure out where do I need to locate this to manage the behavior of this knitwear. I'm going to do one of my favorite styles. Which is to bring most of the volume to one side, and then I have a long side and a short side. And then I'm just going to have a flat, I like flat stylings because you can see the knitting. And they're not bunchy. And the behavior is controlled. And then I don't have to look it up. I like stylings that do not require my constant attention to be revised. And so I'm in control the upper and lower relationship of the material by placing my stud buttons where the fabric would kind of come undone and fail. So I'm creating kind of a triangular configuration. Because if I if I leave this untended, of course it's going to flap, because the fabric will go to where the closure is. It if you're not managing the entire overlap, it will migrate to where the closure is. If I put the closure here and I didn't secure it here, this underside would migrate to where the closure was. So if you don't want that to happen, because you'll feel it and you'll smooth it out, and it will migrate, and you'll feel it and you'll smooth it out, and it will migrate, and you'll feel it, and like that. And that's called annoying. Over the course of a day, that can be what brings you to tears if you can't get the phone company to, do whatever you need to do, or you find that you let the meter run out, or, just like that one extra thing, that straw that breaks the camel's back and mess you up. So I'm just judging this, moving it a little bit so that it works better. I must have done just something slightly weird. So then with those 3 points of connection, I end up with kind of a dramatic styling here. That it's a styling that kind of looks like a styling that shouldn't persist in real life. But by using a team of stud buttons, you can manage an entire deep overlap like this and maintain a styling that would not be able to be maintained in any other way. Like, you'll see product photography like that with no closure, and it looks so cool. But it's totally impossible to maintain without being managed in this way by something.
Yeah, it looks great if you're not moving, right, Laura?
But as soon as you move, if you don't secure it like this with something, and stud buttons are the best for this kind of deep overlap, where you have one part of the material really crossing deeply over the other, because it's over, the line of the underside is here. So it wouldn't, this whole relationship would not be able to be maintained without doing something. You could do safety pins, but it wouldn't be as pretty. And it would mess up your fabric. So that's why I love the stud buttons, is because they are so flexible that you can identify, if I don't put something here, it will fail. You can do that analysis. You could create anything on the body and then ask yourself, okay, where do I need something? And you could do anything you want. If you can put it on your body and have it stay by friction for 2 seconds, then you can make it last all day with stud buttons. And they're light and they're fast to put together. And then you can inhabit that fabulousness effortlessly for the whole day and do whatever you have to do. And it just works. And that's why I love the stud buttons, because they are so incredibly functional. And they give you this creative opportunity. It's like a design tool. You get to take that 2-dimensional piece that the designer worked out and wrap it around your body, and that's when your design process starts as the knitter or the crocheter. You're working with somebody else's fabric. It's pretty. They figured something out. They weren't worried about how it was going to work on your body. That's your job. They left you alone with that problem. But then you get to wrap it around your body and figure out what feels best and looks best on me. And then you're designing, and you get to do that every time you put it on. Until you find the perfect, the one where you're like, oh, this is the best, I love this, I'm gonna wear this piece like this forever after. And I have
the other thing too is that not only is it functional, but I mean, we do want to bring it back to the fact that it is also jewelry. So, you've got so many different finishes. So depending on your knitwear, the color of your yarn, what you're looking to accent, do you want it to pop? Do you want it to blend? So there's so many ways for it to be functional, but then for it to also be an accessory to just add a little bit of something extra, to what it is that you're wearing. And, that's the part that I love too, because I'm not a very loud person necessarily with my colors, but instead I do like to accentuate, with jewelry in that sense. So that's what's really nice about it. And again, all the different finishes allows it to really like appeal to different people depending on, what they're looking for.
This, this is yes, I completely agree with you. That, yes, I don't have anything to add to what you said. 100%, yes, this shape that I just put on is this shape, and my head is here. So it's like this.
One of the, if I can interject too, I mean, one of the pieces that this is also, and I really haven't, guys, had a chance to play around with things too much either, but for anybody that has done the Fairwind shawl that Kate Atherley designed using my sport weight yarn, it's a brioche pattern. It's a really cool, like asymmetrical, geometric shape. However, every time I try to wear it in order to be able to show people, it's small, and it's cute, but it doesn't stay. And so that's one of the pieces that I was so excited about to be able to get to play around with, because you can create it as a cowl, by then using the buttons, or at the same time, if you want to be able to show off the shape and have it hang off the side of your body because the design itself is so cool, and not hide it by wrapping it up as like a cowl. I mean, it does not stay. So, again, it's a beautiful piece, but it does need some type of hardware in order for it to remain on your body so that you can actually function and not just, pose while wearing it, for the time in which you're trying to show it off to your customers. So
Just earlier, they got an email from a customer who showed me a jacket that she had just finished, and she was closing it with a women's closure, and the neckline was quite open. She had space down the front, and then the women's closure kind of bridge between the two sides. And I was curious, I looked up the designer and found the kit that she had done for the sweater. So beautiful. And when I looked at the product photography, of course, there's no closure on the sweater. And it was quite open, so I was wondering, okay, what did the designer include? The product photography, I'll just show you. I just laughed when I saw this. It was like, oh yeah, that's what they do when the sweater really needs a closure. You can tell from the photograph. So pretend this is a sweater, and the product photography is like this. That means, for any of you who haven't already figured out, when the cardigan is being held by the model like this, it means that what happens on the body is it pulls behind the bust. That's what happens. And that kept happening in the photo shoot. And so the direction was, hold the sides of the sweater like this, because otherwise you weren't going to be able to see the knitting, right? But that's a problem. That's a problem that then everybody who makes that sweater has that problem. That the sweater, instead of hanging like this, it's got no closure. Instead of hanging like that, it goes like this. And so you find yourself going like this all the time, and it goes like that. And so you're like having this silent argument with your cardigan. Come on, cover my boobs. And it's like, no way. Like, no. So then you need a closure. But she doesn't show a closure. There's no buttons in the whole So, you know, again, these guys, they can become your buttons when you don't have, when the designer didn't give you any guidance. The stud buttons can become your buttons. And so just, you know, little helpful hint, I've had people say, well, what do you do when you want to open your sweater? And I'll show you. So just pretend that this is a cardigan, that the designer did not put buttons on, and so we are rectifying the situation, taking control of our own lives. And so there's the cardigan. We have a single button. Because, you know, today you can wear a single button. But tomorrow I'm trying to, my light is not very good here, I'm sorry. I'm hunting around, feeling a little blind. Because I cast the shadow on my desk. So I could do the one button today for my cardigan, but what if tomorrow I want to do a little cluster of dense leaves? A little cluster of arrangement with the 3 buttons so that I get the 3 shapes like right in relation to one another. That's full, right? I like that. Okay, so now I'm buttoned up and I want to unbutton my sweater. This is the question. Well, what do you do when you want to unbutton it? So this is what you do. So take my backing off. I pull the stud off of the back and just put my backing back on it. Right? This is called unbuttoning. They still live there. I know where I want them to be when I decide to button it back up, when I get tired of my argument with the sweater. Wanting to go back here. But you don't have to do all of them, like you could just do the top. That's so unbuttoning is then storing it in the location where you want it on the one side. That's all.
Perfect. No, and that's great. I'm glad that you showed that, because that was one of the, I mean, it seems so simple, but at the same time, when people would ask the difference between like the screw in closure, you know, versus those, that, yeah, that would be the fear that otherwise, you know, needing to get it off, you would lose it. But at the same time, I love the other piece that you had where the way you styled it, it kind of just went on as is. So I guess it just depends on what you're working with. Oh, we can't hear you again. That's okay. Well, as Laura's working on that though, also, I mean, one of the things that I want to say though too, guys, is because I know I've seen some questions in the chat. I mean, I think for the sake of the continuity and, you know, everyone's going to have individual style questions. I think like anything else, it's almost kind of like if you have an opportunity to test drive the car, take that opportunity. So, you know, I get that not everybody can join us at Vogue Knitting Live in New York City. If you can, I do have the distinct pleasure, Laura's right across the way from me. So we've worked out, she's going to be adorning her buttons. I will have the cuffs on my side. Certainly if I can assist her in any way as far as using knitwear. But my point is that you can be there and you can try it. You know, I think the other thing too is having some of your own creative license, that first have an idea of maybe what you think is going to work for you and the knitwear that you're trying to solve a problem with. But then it is also going to take you going home with it and practicing and trying it, because everybody's body is different and everyone's going to want to wear something different. So don't be afraid to have your own ideas and put your own twist on it. I mean, yes, Laura can do amazing things, as she's already shown, you know, with her stuff, and that's a bit of just, you know, how her DNA works. But at the same time, play around with it, yourself as well, and see what works for you, and come up with your own creative solutions also. So I think that that's important, is that there's not going to be just one answer for everybody, and there's a million and one knitwears out there that need solutions. So it's a matter of, you also figuring out a little bit of how things work and what might work for you too.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So here's a thought that I want you to consider. This is a big triangular shawl, so this is a very familiar shape. One of the things I love to do with a triangular shawl is turn it upside down. Fold it down. And then start playing with this kind of collar-like form that I get. So if you have a huge, massive triangle, this is one way to take up some volume. So you're dealing with a smaller scale form. Because sometimes styling massive, massive pieces is really difficult. Because what you're trying then to do is take up that volume. and it's, if it's like a massive Stephen West thing, because he really, I think, designed everything for his own body scale, which is huge. He's such a huge man that he can take a huge piece, and even, it falls to the ground, it's still not dragging. But for us who are smaller, most people are probably smaller than Stephen West. If you've ever seen him, he's a giant. That's you're in what I call compensatory styling territory, where your main task is then like, how do I manage the fact that I am dealing with incredible excess volume? And turning it upside down and turning that, turning the triangular point down gives you a smaller piece to work with. Now I've created one of these impossible stylings that if you walked around for 5 minutes or a gust of wind came up, it would just like explode. But with the stud buttons, you can actually hold it all in place, and it becomes a comfortable, interesting, kind of romantic drapey, and yet at the same time simple shape, and it all works. And I can make the buttons even disappear. Because there's one holding this relationship in place, and you can't even see it.
Now, Laura, as you're doing that, only for while you're finishing your masterpiece, and only for the interest of time, because I don't want to continue to lose a couple people as we have. I mean, we're still holding fast here. But while you're putting your buttons on, I do have 32 people still with us in the chat. So can you pick a number for me from 1 to 32 while you're doing that?
Did you hear that?
No.
19.
19. Okay, good. So you keep buttoning yourself, and I'm going to run through. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Hold tight. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Maria Hall. So Maria, I'm going to make a note. I know you're not feeling well, so maybe this made you feel a little bit better. So you are going to get that $20 store credit.
Great. Sorry. Great. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Well, we'll get that into your account after we're done with the 12 days of Christmas.
Gotcha.
So you, finish just sharing with us there, Laura, and then I'm going to need to do a little housekeeping and make sure everybody knows about my specials, your specials, before we wrap up for the evening.
Yeah, so this is just my effort to inspire you. It looks like I would need actually one more color here. To turn things upside down. So I've just noticed, so I've got 3 points of where I've secured the draping. and one right here. I need one more, because you can see that this is falling down. But I think you can see too, that this is a really cool styling. I think it looks really great and really interesting. And it's that simple triangular shape that we all have, right? And this does not look like that. This, you know, it like, put this on top of a suit jacket and go out for a brunch for Mother's Day or something, and it would just look so beautiful and just kind of like people would be like, oh my God, that woman has such effortless style. Wow. And it's 4 little stud buttons, triangle turned upside down, folded down, and you know, kind of tucked up under, and then you get these neat yeah, see, I really do need one more. Right here. Okay. Then you get these really interesting diagonals, and diagonals are keep a dynamic composition going, so that when somebody looks at you, their eye's going to follow these diagonals up to the face. Always the eye is going to travel along those diagonals and come to the face. And so this is just to inspire you to mess around and try to find these shapes hidden in your knitwear, and then find comfortable ways that you can secure them with closures so that the knitwear stays on your body, helping you to look and feel the way you really want to.
Well, Laura, I cannot thank you enough. I mean, I knew this was going to be interesting. And of course it was. I mean, you're such an interesting personality, and you have such a dynamic aura about you that I really have enjoyed. And I knew your background, of course, and how you arrived at all of this would just be so cool. I mean, I know on the other hand, we probably could have spent, you know, an hour easily, you know, going through the styling, and perhaps that's just an opportunity or an excuse to do some kind of follow up, you know, as we move along. But you know what I want to, of course, you know, just make sure, again, as I said, guys, for me, it's also about the story and about the people, and just having that full circle appreciation, you know, to all of it. So I want to just remind everybody of a couple of things, because we've got 2 different things for you. So first of all, remember that my sale for you will end after tomorrow night. Laura's is going to extend well after, which is amazing. So I do have a small offering, because again, I selected what I liked and chose to have in store. So if you're still looking to get a couple more raffle tickets in for that basket, remember my code TDOC 23, and that's going to get you 10% off, including 10% off any of Laura's items that I do have on my site, but that ends tomorrow night. So then moving forward, if you decide there's something that you're looking for, you've got until January 11th to be able to use Laura's code, which is Long Island, and then that's going to get you 10% off as well. And of course, you know, there's so many more things that she has available that I don't have in my store, so definitely be sure to take a look at her website. And then for anybody that is local and you'll be at Vogue Knitting Live in New York City, as I said, the 2 of us will be there together across the aisle away from each other, which will be super fun to have a little bit of a chance to visit, although I know we're going to be swamped, and, you know, other than just, you know, adorning glances, that's probably about all we'll, you know, have time for there. So, oh, I lost your voice again. We can't hear you.
What?
There we go. Now I hear you.
Yeah, so I'll have my son with me.
Oh, cool.
Been curious after hearing these stories about my son. He'll be with me in the booth in New York.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, we'll get to a chance to put that all together, and you'll be putting him to work, and so we'll see who he charms while he's there as well.
Great.
So, all right, guys, with that, I still have some farm chores to do, believe it or not. And so I am, again, just going to thank everybody for being with us this evening. Definitely drop me some feedback. I know everybody enjoyed this. And thank you so much, Laura, for sharing your time with us. I cannot say thank you enough. I'll be sure to forward to you any of the feedback I hear on my end. Guys, don't forget, tomorrow night is our last guest. That is Sue Nagel from Sandpiper Yarns. We actually do have another yarn drop that's going to happen tomorrow night as well. Sue actually has had some of my Cotswold that she hand dyed, hand spun in a different way than what Heidi did earlier this week. Sue also is local, so she's been to my farm. She herself as well is an amazing spirit, just loves the animals with a passion and a love for life, and what she does with her spinning is really more of a hobby than anything else, but you can find her at some trade shows as well. Her art yarn is unique in its own right, so I've always loved it and admired it, so I'm looking forward to having her on. I'm happy to call her a friend. So that'll be our last conversation for the 12 days of Christmas before we party on Saturday night. So everybody, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in the DMs, and we'll see you again tomorrow night. So thank you so much, everybody. Take care.